He threw the cake and expected laughter, not consequences. The room burst before the frosting even settled, a ripple of polished laughter echoing off marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the kind of laughter that didn't ask permission, that assumed it owned the space. Danielle Carter stood at the center of it, perfectly still, as the soft vanilla cream slid slowly down the edge of her jaw and onto the collar of her tailored ivory suit, the fabric darkening where it soaked in. The orchestra didn't stop immediately, just faltered, like it wasn't sure whether this was part of the evening's entertainment. Then even the music gave up. Silence didn't fall all at once. It crept in, one breath at a time, as eyes began to shift, as people started realizing they were watching something that wasn't supposed to happen. Ethan Whitmore, 17, rich in the careless way only inherited money allows, leaned back with a grin that stretched too easily across his face. "Relax," he said, brushing invisible crumbs from his cuff. "It's just a joke." His mother's laugh followed, light and dismissive, her diamonds catching the chandelier light as she tilted her glass. His father didn't laugh as loudly, but he didn't stop it either. That was the louder message. Danielle didn't move right away. Her hand rested at her side, fingers relaxed, breath steady, as if the moment hadn't reached her yet. Then, slowly, she lifted a linen napkin from the table beside her. No rush, no tremor. She pressed it gently against her cheek, wiping the frosting away in one smooth motion, as if she were removing dust, not humiliation. The scent of sugar lingered in the air, mixing with expensive cologne and polished wood, something oddly sweet in a room that suddenly felt cold. A few guests looked down, others stared too long, unsure where to place their attention. Somewhere near the back, a phone screen lit up, a quiet notification no one acknowledged out loud. Danielle's eyes lifted, not to the boy, but past him, landing on Richard Whitmore. She held his gaze, calm, level, unreadable. There was no anger there. That was what unsettled it. No anger, just clarity. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice soft. Enough that people leaned in without realizing they were doing it. "I was ready to move forward tonight." A pause, the kind that stretched thin across the room like glass about to crack. Richard adjusted his stance, something in his posture tightening, but he still smiled, still played his role. "Then let's not let a small misunderstanding ruin a good deal," he replied, easy, practiced, unaware of how fragile the ground beneath him had become. Danielle nodded once, almost politely, as if acknowledging the attempt. Her thumb brushed across the screen of her phone, a small, quiet motion, barely noticeable. But across the room, another screen flickered. Then another. Numbers shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. The air changed. And for the first time that night, the Whitmores stopped laughing. The first whisper did not come from the Whitmores. It came from the edge of the room. A junior analyst staring down at his phone like it had just burned him, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "The transfer, it is gone." Another screen lit up, then another, a soft chain reaction of glowing rectangles and trembling hands as numbers refreshed and red indicators replaced green. Danielle Carter did not look down at her own phone. She already knew. The air shifted again, heavier now, as if the room itself understood something irreversible had just happened. Richard Whitmore's smile did not disappear all at once. It held for a second too long, stretched thin across his face before cracking at the edges. "There must be a delay," he said, more to himself than to anyone else, his voice calm in tone but not in rhythm. He stepped toward one of his advisors, extending a hand. "Let me see that." The advisor hesitated for half a breath before handing over the device, and that hesitation said more than any number on the screen. Richard's eyes scanned quickly, then again, slower this time, as if repetition might change the outcome. It did not. Across from him, Victoria Whitmore lowered her glass, the soft clink against the table sounding louder than it should have. "Richard?" she asked, her voice no longer amused, no longer light. Ethan's grin faded last. He looked, from face to face, searching for confirmation that this was still part of the joke, that someone would laugh again and reset the room. No one did. Danielle finally shifted her weight, a small, controlled movement that drew attention back to her without effort. The faint trace of cream remained at the edge of her sleeve, a quiet reminder that nothing about this moment had been accidental. She placed the napkin down beside her, folding it once, precisely, as if closing a chapter no one else had realized they were inside. "What did you do?" Richard asked, and now his voice carried something new, something closer to urgency than authority. Danielle met his gaze again, steady and unhurried. "I changed my decision," she said. No emphasis, no drama, just truth delivered at the same volume as before. One of the executives near the far table stepped closer, clearing his throat as if trying to reintroduce logic into a room that had already moved past it. "Mr. Whitmore, the Carter Holdings authorization was the final approval layer. Without it, the acquisition cannot proceed." The words landed flat, clinical, but their meaning rippled outward, touching every corner of the ballroom. Ethan took a step back without realizing it, his heel catching the edge of the carpet, his balance shifting just enough to betray him. He looked at Danielle again, really looked this time, as if seeing her for the first time without the filter of assumption. "It was just a joke," he said, softer now, the confidence gone from his voice. Danielle did not answer him. Not yet. Instead, she glanced briefly at the long table where contracts still lay untouched, pages waiting for signatures that would never come. The ink would stay dry tonight. Richard exhaled slowly, running a hand along his jaw, recalibrating, searching for control in a moment that refused to give it back. "We can fix this," he said, stepping forward, lowering his voice as if proximity could restore leverage. "Whatever this is, we can fix it." Danielle watched him for a moment, the silence between them no longer empty, but full, weighted with everything that had led to this exact second. Then she spoke again, just as calmly as before. It was already fixed. And that was when the room understood this had not started with the cake. No one spoke for a moment after that, not because they did not have questions, but because they were starting to understand the answers would not be simple. The silence settled deeper, heavier, pressing against the glass walls and polished floors like something alive. Danielle Carter stood exactly where she had been, composed, unmoved, as if the shifting tension around her belonged to a different world. Across from her, Richard Whitmore adjusted his stance again, but this time there was no performance left in it, only calculation. His eyes moved quickly, not just at her, but at the room, at the executives, at the screens still glowing with numbers that refused to change back. "What do you mean it was already fixed?" he asked, slower now, choosing each word carefully. Danielle tilted her head slightly, considering him, not with hostility, but with a kind of measured patience. "3 months ago," she said, her voice steady, "your company was about to approve a supplier contract that would have cost you over $100 million in hidden liabilities within the first year." A few heads turned instantly at that, recognition flashing across faces that had not expected to hear this story tonight. One man near the far table straightened, his expression tightening as if he had just remembered something he had tried to forget. Danielle continued, not raising her voice, yet somehow reaching every corner of the room. The clause was buried. Page 27. Subsection C. It transferred responsibility for regulatory penalties entirely onto your side. Richard's jaw shifted, just slightly, enough to show that he knew exactly what she was talking about. "We caught it," Danielle said, quietly, corrected it, and made sure the deal never went through. She paused, letting the weight of that settle, not as a boast, but as context. "You never saw it because we did not need you to." Victoria Whitmore's hand tightened around the stem of her glass, her eyes moving quickly between Danielle and her husband. "Richard, is that true?" she asked, her voice low, uncertain in a way it had not been before. Richard did not answer right away. His silence answered enough. Around them, the room shifted again, not just with tension now, but with perspective, as if the roles everyone had assumed at the beginning of the night were quietly being rewritten. Ethan stood frozen near the table, his earlier confidence completely gone, his gaze fixed on Danielle, as if trying to reconcile the image he had created in his mind with the reality standing in front of him. You helped us," he said, the question sounding almost like disbelief. Danielle finally looked at him directly. There was no anger in her expression, no sharpness, just a calm clarity that felt far heavier than either. "I protected the deal," she said simply, "because it made sense. Because it was right." Her eyes flicked briefly to the contract still waiting on the table, untouched, its pages perfectly aligned, its future already decided. Then she looked back at him. Tonight, it did not. The words did not echo, but they lingered, settling into the space between them like something permanent. Richard exhaled slowly, running both hands through his hair now, the polished composure he had carried all evening slipping further away. "You should have told me," he said, not accusing, but searching, as if that one detail might have changed everything. Danielle held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave the slightest shake of her head. "I should not have had to." And in that moment, the distance between them was no longer measured in feet across a ballroom, but in understanding that had never been there to begin with. The room did not recover. It adjusted, slowly, uneasily, like a system trying to stabilize after a shock it was never built to handle. Conversations did not resume. They fractured into whispers, into side glances, into quiet calculations happening behind composed faces. Danielle Carter remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence now impossible to ignore. The faint stain on her sleeve had dried slightly, a small, physical reminder of a moment that had already shifted everything. Richard Whitmore took a step back, not out of retreat, but out of necessity, as if distance might help him think more clearly. He looked at the contract again, then at Danielle, then at the people watching him, and for the first time that night, he seemed aware of how many eyes were measuring him. "This deal benefits both sides," he said, his voice steadier now, though quieter, less commanding than before. "We can reset. We can move forward." The words sounded practiced, familiar, but they landed differently now, stripped of the certainty they once carried. Danielle listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, her gaze steady. When he finished, she let a small silence sit between them, just long enough to make the absence of immediate agreement noticeable. Then she spoke. "A deal is not just numbers," she said. "It is trust. It is judgment. It is who you choose to stand across from." Her eyes moved briefly, not scanning, but acknowledging the room, the witnesses, the silent observers who would carry this moment beyond these walls. Then they returned to him. Tonight answered that question. Victoria shifted in place, her composure tightening, her earlier confidence replaced with something more careful. "Danielle," she said, her tone softer now, almost conciliatory. "Ethan is young. He made a mistake. We all do. This does not have to define the outcome." Ethan lowered his gaze slightly at the sound of his name, the weight of attention pressing down on him in a way he had never experienced before. Danielle looked at him again, not sharply, not accusingly, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "It is not the mistake," she said quietly. "It is the response to it." Ethan swallowed, his voice coming slower this time, stripped of the casual confidence it once carried. "I said it was a joke," he offered, as if repeating it might restore its meaning. Danielle held his gaze for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "You said it was a joke after you saw the reaction," she replied. "That is not the same thing." The words settled heavily, not loud, but precise, cutting through the last fragments of denial still lingering in the room. Richard exhaled again, longer this time, his shoulders lowering just enough to reveal the strain beneath his control. "What would it take?" he asked, the question direct now, stripped of negotiation tactics, of posturing. Danielle did not answer immediately. She looked at the contract once more, then at the phone still glowing faintly in people's hands, then back at him. When she spoke, her voice was as calm as it had been from the beginning. "It would take a different beginning," she said. A pause followed, quiet but definitive. "And we are already past that." No one argued with her, not because they could not, but because they understood that the moment to change the direction had already passed, unnoticed until it was too late. Danielle reached for her phone again, not to change anything, but to place it gently into her bag, a small, final gesture that signaled completion rather than escalation. The orchestra remained silent. The chandeliers still glowed. The room looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but nothing inside it was the same anymore. The shift did not end with her words. It spread, quiet and steady, like something inevitable finally revealing itself. People who had arrived confident now stood uncertain, their posture changed, their voices lowered, their attention no longer fixed on the deal, but on Danielle Carter. The power in the room had not vanished, it had simply moved, and everyone could feel where it had settled. Near the back, one of the senior partners cleared his throat, attempting to anchor the moment back to business. There may still be a path forward, he said carefully, glancing between Danielle and Richard, if both parties are willing to revisit terms under revised conditions. The suggestion hung in the air, fragile, testing whether anything could still be salvaged. Danielle did not dismiss it immediately. Instead, she let her eyes move across the room once more, taking in the faces, the subtle shifts, the quiet discomfort that had replaced earlier laughter. She saw who looked away first, who held her gaze, who understood, and who still did not. Then she spoke. This was never only about terms, she said, her voice even, carrying without effort. It was about alignment. Richard exhaled. Slowly, his expression now stripped of any remaining pretense. And you believe we are not aligned, he said, not as a challenge, but as a conclusion he was beginning to accept. Danielle nodded once. I believe tonight showed me something I did not see before, she replied. The words were simple, but they carried a finality that could not be negotiated around. Ethan shifted again, his hands no longer steady at his sides. He looked at his parents, then back at Danielle, as if searching for something he had lost without realizing it. If I apologize, he said, the words hesitant, unfamiliar. Would that change anything? The question landed softly, but it drew every eye in the room back to him. Danielle studied him for a moment, not judging, not dismissing, just observing. An apology matters, she said, but it does not erase what it reveals. Ethan swallowed, the weight of that answer settling deeper than he expected. Victoria stepped forward slightly, her voice careful, measured. Danielle, we value this partnership, she said. We value you. Do not let one moment undo years of potential. Danielle's gaze shifted to her, calm and unwavering. One moment does not undo anything, she said. It clarifies everything. The room absorbed that in silence. No one interrupted. No one contradicted her. Richard looked down at the contract again, then slowly closed it, his hand resting on top of the pages as if acknowledging what they had become, not an agreement, but a missed opportunity. Then this is your final decision, he said. Danielle did not hesitate. Yes, she answered. No emphasis, no hesitation, just certainty. A quiet breath moved through the room, not quite relief, not quite resignation, something in between. Danielle reached for her bag, lifting it with the same composed precision she had shown from the beginning. She did not rush. She did not linger. As she turned, the soft sound of her heels against the polished floor echoed just enough to draw attention, not demand it. She moved toward the exit, each step measured, unhurried, as if the outcome had never been in question for her. Behind her, no one called her back. No one stopped her. The chandeliers still glowed. The tables remained set, the night technically unfinished, but the purpose of it had already dissolved. Ethan watched her go, his expression no longer confused, but changed, something quieter, something more aware. Richard remained where he stood, his hand still resting on the closed contract, his gaze no longer on the deal, but on the space she had just left behind. And in that space, what remained was not the loss of $700 million, but the realization that it had never truly been theirs to lose. The door did not slam when Danielle Carter left. It closed softly, almost respectfully, the quiet click echoing longer than any raised voice could have. For a moment, no one moved. The ballroom remained frozen in a strange stillness, as if everyone was waiting for something to reverse itself, for the numbers to change back, for the laughter to return, for the night to correct its course. It did not. Richard Whitmore finally lowered his hand from the contract, his fingers lingering on the edge before pulling away completely, as if even touching it now felt different. He looked around the room, not as a host anymore, but as a man recalculating the ground beneath him. Conversations began again, but they were quieter now, measured, careful, the kind of conversations people have when they know they are being watched, or worse, remembered. Victoria adjusted her posture, lifting her glass again but not drinking, her reflection in the surface shifting slightly with the light. We will recover, she said, more firmly than she felt, her voice aimed at no one in particular and everyone at the same time. One of the senior advisors stepped closer, lowering his voice. We might, he said, but not like before. The words were not confrontational, just factual, and that made them heavier. Ethan had not moved from his spot. His eyes were still fixed on the doorway Danielle had walked through, as if expecting her to return, as if hoping this had all been some kind of test he could still pass. His hand lifted slightly, then dropped again, uncertain, and used to not knowing what to do next. "Dad," he said quietly, the word unfamiliar in its tone, stripped of ease. Richard turned to him slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt different now, not physical, but something else, something newly visible. "Do you understand what just happened?" Richard asked, not sharply, but directly. Ethan hesitated, searching for something that felt honest enough to say. "I thought it did not matter," he admitted, his voice low. "I thought it was just a moment." Richard nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible motion. "It was," he said, "and that is exactly why it mattered." The answer settled between them, not as blame, but as recognition. Across the room, the executives had begun gathering their things, not abruptly, not in a rush, but with the quiet efficiency of people who knew the outcome was final. Phones were put away. Jackets were adjusted. Eyes avoided direct contact, not out of disrespect, but out of discomfort, the kind that lingers long after a moment has passed. Near the far table, one of the younger analysts looked down at the contract again, then slowly shook his head, as if trying to understand how something so solid an hour ago could become irrelevant so quickly. Outside, beyond the tall glass windows, the city lights stretched endlessly, steady and indifferent, cars moving, people walking, life continuing without pause. Inside, the room felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because the illusion of control within it had. Ethan finally turned away from the door, his gaze dropping to his own hands. There was still a faint trace of frosting along his cuff, a small detail he had not noticed before. He rubbed it with his thumb, but it did not come off completely. He stared at it for a moment longer, then exhaled slowly, something in his expression shifting, not fully understood yet, but no longer the same. Richard watched him, then glanced once more toward the door Danielle had walked through. He did not call after her. He did not send anyone. He simply stood there, the realization settling in layers. Some things, once revealed, could not be undone, and some decisions, once made, did not ask for permission to matter. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime that felt almost out of place after the weight of the ballroom, and Danielle Carter stepped inside without looking back, her reflection catching briefly in the brushed steel walls before the doors closed again, sealing the silence around her. The hum of the descent was steady, mechanical, predictable, a contrast to everything she had just left behind. She did not reach for her phone right away. Instead, she stood still, shoulders relaxed, breathing even, as if she were allowing the moment to settle into something permanent before moving on. A faint smear of frosting remained near the edge of her cuff, barely visible now, but still there, a small, physical trace of a decision that had already changed the trajectory of more than one company. When the elevator reached the lobby, the doors opened to a different kind of quiet, softer, less charged, the marble floors stretching out beneath warm lighting, the distant sound of a fountain replacing the tension of whispered conversations. The concierge looked up briefly, then straightened slightly, recognizing her, though not fully understanding what had just unfolded upstairs. Danielle walked past without pause, her heels measured, consistent, each step grounded, as if she had walked this path many times before. Outside, the night air met her with a cool edge, the city alive in a way the ballroom had not been, headlights passing in steady lines, the low hum of traffic constant and indifferent. A black car pulled up to the curb almost immediately, the driver stepping out with quiet efficiency, opening the rear door without needing to be asked. Danielle paused for a fraction of a second before getting in, her hand brushing lightly against the door frame, not hesitating, just marking the transition. Inside the car, the world softened again, the city lights blurring slightly through tinted glass as the door closed behind her. Only then did she reach for her phone. The screen lit up instantly, a series of notifications waiting, messages from her team, updates already moving forward without her needing to instruct them. One message stood out, short, direct. "Are we proceeding with the alternative?" Danielle read it once, then again, her expression unchanged, her thumb hovering just above the screen. For a moment, the silence inside the car felt deeper than anything she had experienced that night. Then she typed, slow, deliberate. Yes, move forward. She sent the message and placed the phone down beside her, the decision made without hesitation, without second-guessing. Outside, the car merged into traffic, the city continuing as it always did, unaffected by the collapse of one deal or the rise of another. Back inside the ballroom, the absence she left behind had begun to take shape in ways no one could fully control. And in that moving car, with the faint scent of leather and the distant glow of streetlights passing by, Danielle Carter did not look back, not because she could not, but because she already knew there was nothing left there that belonged to her. The car moved steadily through the city, headlights sliding across the glass like passing thoughts, each one brief, each one gone before it could settle, and Danielle Carter sat quietly in the back seat, her posture unchanged, her gaze resting somewhere beyond the reflection staring back at her. The driver did not speak. He did not need to. The destination had already been set, just like everything else tonight. A soft vibration came from her phone, then another, then a third, each one a signal that the decision she made was already unfolding in real time. She picked it up again, not rushed, not eager, just precise. A new message appeared from her chief financial officer. Whitmore stock is reacting. Down 12% in after hours. She read it once, then locked the screen without replying, her thumb pausing briefly before letting the device rest again. It was not satisfaction that crossed her face. It was recognition. Actions had weight. They always did. Outside, a group of pedestrians waited at a crosswalk, their conversations animated, unaware of the shift that had just taken place a few blocks away, unaware that a single moment inside a ballroom had already begun to ripple outward into markets, into headlines, into decisions that would reach far beyond tonight. The car slowed at a red light, the glow washing over the interior in a soft crimson hue. Danielle's reflection sharpened for a second in the window, clearer now, more defined, the faint trace on her sleeve still visible if you looked closely enough. She did not wipe it away this time. She let it remain. Another message appeared, this one from her operations director. Alternative partner confirmed. Terms stronger than Whitmore offer. Awaiting final signature. Danielle exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but out of alignment, as if everything was moving exactly where it was supposed to go. She typed a single response. Proceed. The light turned green. The car moved again. In the distance, the skyline stretched upward, glass towers reflecting one another, each window holding a different story, a different decision, a different consequence. Somewhere in one of those buildings, people would already be reacting, recalculating, adjusting strategies based on what had just changed. Back at the hotel, the ballroom would be emptying by now, the music never returning, the tables still set for a celebration that had quietly ended before it could begin. Ethan Whitmore would still be standing there, or maybe sitting now, his mind replaying a moment he could not undo, trying to understand how something so small had carried something so large. And Richard Whitmore, a man used to controlling outcomes, would be learning what it felt like when control was never his to begin with. Inside the car, Danielle leaned back slightly, her eyes closing for just a second, not in exhaustion, but in stillness, the kind that comes when a decision is complete and nothing more needs to be added to it. When she opened them again, the city had shifted slightly, a new block, a new set of lights, a new direction, and she remained exactly the same, composed, steady, moving forward without hesitation, without regret, because for her, this had never been about proving power. It had always been about choosing it correctly. The car turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the city fading into a low hum as glass towers gave way to darker facades and longer shadows, and Danielle Carter sat forward slightly, her eyes no longer on the skyline, but on the reflection of movement. Passing across the window, each flicker of light marking distance from a night that was already becoming something else. Her phone remained still beside her, no new vibrations for the moment, just a pause between outcomes, the kind that only exists before the next shift begins. The driver slowed again, not for traffic this time, but for the gated entrance ahead, the security lights casting a pale glow across the pavement as the barrier lifted without question. Danielle did not speak. She did not need to. The car rolled through, smooth, uninterrupted, the world outside narrowing into something more controlled, more deliberate. Inside, the silence settled differently now, not heavy, not tense, but quiet in a way that allowed thought to surface without resistance. For a brief second, her gaze dropped to her sleeve again, to the faint mark that had followed her out of the ballroom and into this space, still there, still visible. She ran her fingers lightly across the fabric, not to remove it, but to feel it, to acknowledge it, as if it belonged to the story more than to the moment. The car came to a gradual stop beneath a covered entrance, the engine softening into stillness, and the driver stepped out without a word, opening the door with the same quiet precision as before. Danielle stepped out into the dim light, the air cooler here, calmer, untouched by the noise of downtown, and for a second she paused, not out of hesitation, but awareness, as if marking the transition from one decision into the next. Inside the building, the lobby lights were lower, softer, the kind that did not demand attention but offered it, and a single figure stood near the reception desk, waiting. Marcus Hale did not move immediately when she entered, but his posture shifted, straightening just enough to show that he had been watching the door, expecting her, tracking the outcome before she said a word. "It is done," he said quietly, not as a question, but as confirmation. Danielle nodded once, setting her bag down briefly on the counter, her movements unhurried, exact. "Yes," she replied. Marcus studied her for a moment, his eyes flicking briefly to the sleeve, then back to her face, understanding more from what was not said than what was. "The alternative group is ready," he added. They moved faster than expected. Danielle allowed the faintest hint of acknowledgement, not surprise, not pride, just alignment with something that had already been set in motion. "They were always ready," she said. Marcus gave a slight nod, as if that confirmed something he had suspected. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet between them not empty, but complete, filled with the understanding of how much had shifted in a single evening. Then Marcus reached for a folder on the desk, sliding it gently toward her. "There is one more detail," he said. Danielle looked down at it, her hand resting lightly on the edge before opening it, her eyes scanning the first page, then pausing, just long enough to register that something in this next step was not as simple as the last. She did not look up right away. The silence stretched, thin, deliberate, and when she finally spoke, her voice was just as calm as before. "They included him," she said. Marcus did not need to ask who. He already knew, and for the first time that night, the direction ahead was not entirely one she had already decided. Marcus did not reach for the folder again. He simply watched her, the way someone watches a line being drawn that cannot be erased once it is finished. Danielle Carter turned the page slowly, her eyes scanning the details without rushing, each line settling into place before she moved to the next, the quiet of the lobby wrapping around them like a held breath. The name appeared again, not hidden, not softened, placed deliberately within the structure of the new agreement, a minor stakeholder on paper, but present, undeniable. Ethan Whitmore. Danielle closed the folder halfway, her fingers resting along the edge, not gripping it, just holding it there as if measuring the weight of what it represented. "Explain," she said, her voice low, steady, not demanding, but precise. Marcus shifted slightly, his tone matching hers, controlled, factual. "The alternative group acquired a portion of Whitmore's secondary assets after the market drop," he said. "Ethan's trust was part of that structure. It transferred with the acquisition." Danielle's gaze did not lift immediately. The information did not surprise her, but it did not sit cleanly either. Outside, beyond the glass doors, a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the floor, then gone, leaving the room dim again. "So he is attached to the outcome," she said. Marcus nodded once. Indirectly, but yes. The word hung there, indirect, as if it softened something that did not feel soft at all. Danielle reopened the folder, her eyes returning to the page, this time slower, more deliberate, tracing not just the numbers, but the connections, the implications, the threads that tied one decision to another. The deal was stronger. The terms were better. The alignment was clearer. And yet, the presence of that name shifted the center of it, just enough to matter. "He benefits," she said quietly. Marcus did not answer right away. He did not need to. The structure made that clear. Danielle exhaled slowly, not out of frustration, but out of recognition, the kind that comes when a situation becomes more complex than it first appeared. For a moment, the silence between them stretched, thin but steady, as if waiting for her to choose which direction it would move. "Do they know?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "Not yet." It closed fast. Quietly. "They will see it in the morning." Danielle nodded once, absorbing that, her thumb brushing lightly against the edge of the paper, a small, absent motion that carried more thought than it seemed. Somewhere, in another part of the city, Ethan Whitmore was still standing in a room that had changed around him, trying to understand what he had lost. And here, in a quieter space, he was unknowingly part of something he had not chosen. Danielle closed the folder fully this time, the soft sound of paper meeting paper echoing slightly in the stillness. She lifted her gaze to Marcus, calm, steady, unchanged on the surface, but with something deeper moving beneath it now. "Remove him," she said. The words were not sharp. They did not carry anger. They carried decision. Marcus did not respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but because he understood what the request meant. "It will complicate the structure," he said carefully. Danielle held his gaze. "So did tonight." Another pause. Then Marcus gave a slight nod, accepting the direction without further argument. "I will have legal revise it," he said. Danielle picked up her bag again, her posture straight, her movements as controlled as ever. She turned toward the elevators, then paused for just a fraction of a second, her hand resting lightly against the strap. "Not because of what he did," she added quietly, not turning back. Marcus watched her, waiting. "Because of what it would mean if I did not," she finished. Then she stepped forward, the moment closing behind her as cleanly as the door she had walked through earlier, leaving no doubt that this decision, like the one before it, was already final. The elevator doors closed with a soft, controlled glide, sealing Danielle Carter into a space that felt smaller than the lobby but clearer, like a boundary between what had already been decided and what still needed to be carried through. The numbers above the door began to descend, each floor passing with a quiet chime, steady, predictable, nothing like the unpredictable shift that had defined the night. She stood alone, her reflection returning to her in the mirrored walls, calm, composed, unchanged on the surface, but with a depth that had sharpened with every decision made in the last hour. Her hand rested lightly against the strap of her bag, not gripping, not tense, just present, as if grounding her in the moment without needing to control it. The faint mark on her sleeve had dried completely now, no longer soft, no longer fresh, just a trace, something that would remain until she chose to remove it or chose not to. When the elevator reached her floor, the doors opened to a quiet hallway, carpeted, dimly lit, the kind of space designed for privacy rather than presence. She stepped out without hesitation, her heels muted now against the fabric beneath her, each step measured, each movement consistent with the same quiet control she had carried from the beginning. At the end of the hall, a glass door waited, its surface reflecting the low light in soft lines, and, beyond it, her office, still lit, still awake, as if it had been expecting her return. Inside, the air felt different, not colder, not warmer, just familiar, a space where decisions did not echo, they settled. She placed her bag on the desk, the soft thud barely audible, and moved toward the window, her gaze lifting to the city below, the same skyline she had watched from the car, now from a higher, stiller vantage point. Lights moved. Traffic flowed. Nothing had stopped. Nothing ever did. Her phone vibrated again, this time not with urgency, but with confirmation. A message from Marcus. "Legal is revising the structure. Removal in progress." She read it once, then set the phone down without replying, trusting the motion already in place. Behind her, the office remained quiet, the faint hum of climate control the only sound, steady, constant, a reminder that systems continued whether noticed or not. For a moment, she allowed herself to stand still, not thinking forward, not revisiting the past, just present, just aware of the space she occupied and the decisions that had brought her here. Then she turned back to the desk, opening a drawer with a smooth motion, reaching inside for a fresh blouse folded neatly, untouched, waiting. She paused for a fraction of a second, her fingers resting against the fabric, then withdrew them, closing the drawer again without taking it out. The mark on her sleeve remained. She left it there, not as a reminder of what had been done to her, but of what she had chosen in response. Across the city, in a building filled with people who were just now beginning to understand the full extent of what had changed, Ethan Whitmore sat alone, the noise gone, the lights dimmer, the weight of silence pressing in from all sides. He stared at his phone, at the numbers, at the messages he did not fully understand, his reflection faint in the darkened screen. Somewhere in that silence, something had shifted, something quieter than regret, something closer to awareness. And in her office, high above the streets that did not pause for anyone, Danielle Carter stood with her hand resting lightly against the edge of her desk, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, knowing that what mattered was not the moment that had happened, but the decision that had followed it, and that decision was already moving forward without her needing to look back. The city did not slow down for realization, but somewhere between the quiet hum of late-night traffic and the dim glow of office lights left on too long, something had shifted in a way that could not be reversed, not for Danielle Carter, and not for Ethan Whitmore. In her office, the stillness had settled into something deliberate, the kind of silence that follows a decision fully carried through. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass, reflections layered over reflections, each one faintly distorted, like perspectives that only made sense when viewed from the right angle. Danielle stood by the window, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, not searching for anything, not avoiding anything, simply present in a moment that no longer demanded reaction. Her phone remained on the desk behind her, quiet now, the earlier messages replaced by a single update that had arrived minutes ago. Structure revised. Removal complete. She had read it once, then left it there, not needing to confirm what she already knew had been done correctly. The decision had moved from intention to action, from action to consequence, and now into something quieter, something permanent. Across the city, in a dimmer room that still carried the faint echo of what had happened hours earlier, Ethan sat alone, the noise long gone, replaced by a kind of silence that did not feel empty, but heavy, filled with everything he had not understood before. His phone lay in his hand, the screen dim, the numbers no longer updating, just sitting there, final, unmoving. He had read the messages more than once, not because they changed, but because he was trying to find the point where things could have been different. His fingers brushed lightly against the edge of his sleeve again, the faint trace of frosting still there, now dry, almost invisible, but not gone. He did not try to wipe it away this time. Instead, he stared at it, as if it held an answer he had missed. Earlier, it had been a joke. Now, it felt like something else entirely. Something smaller than what it caused, but larger than what he had intended. He leaned back slightly, the chair beneath him creaking softly, his eyes lifting to the empty space across the room, the place where Danielle had stood, where everything had changed without raising its voice. It was just a moment, he said quietly to himself, repeating the thought that had once felt certain. But the words did not settle the same way now. They did not hold. In her office, Danielle turned slightly, her attention shifting from the city to the reflection of the room behind her, the desk, the chair, the quiet order of everything in its place. Nothing had been disrupted here. Nothing needed to be. She walked back to the desk, her steps soft against the floor, and rested her hand lightly against its surface, the same way she had earlier, grounding, steady, present. For a brief second, her eyes moved to the drawer she had opened before, then away again, leaving it closed, leaving the mark on her sleeve untouched. Not everything needed to be erased to be understood. Not everything needed to be fixed to be complete. Somewhere between those two truths, the night found its meaning. And in that space, in two different places across the same city, both of them stood with something new, something quiet, something that did not announce itself, but stayed, shaping what came next without needing to be seen. Morning arrived without announcement, just a gradual shift of light across glass and steel, the city waking the way it always did, unaware of the quiet decisions that had already shaped its direction hours before. In her office, Danielle Carter stood where she had been the night before, though everything about the moment felt different now, not because anything had changed around her, but because nothing needed to. The skyline looked clearer in daylight, sharper, less forgiving, every line defined, every reflection exact. On her desk, the final documents rested neatly aligned, the revised structure complete, the signatures in place, the outcome no longer pending, but real. Her phone lay beside them, silent, no longer carrying questions, only confirmations that had already been accepted. She reached for the papers, not to review them again, but to move them, to place them into a folder, to close what had been opened. The motion was simple, controlled, final. Across the city, in a room that felt smaller in the morning light, Ethan Whitmore sat at the edge of a chair, his posture no longer careless, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular, as if he were still searching for something that had already passed him by. The messages on his phone had stopped coming, replaced by a stillness that did not offer explanation, only result. His father stood near the window, silent, the weight of what had been lost no longer abstract, no longer something to negotiate, but something to carry. "You cannot treat moments like they do not matter," Richard said quietly, not turning around, his voice steady but stripped of its former certainty. Ethan did not answer right away. His fingers moved lightly across the fabric of his sleeve, the faint mark still there, now just a shadow, but enough. "I know," he said finally, the words slower, heavier, as if they had taken time to reach him. Back in her office, Danielle closed the folder and set it aside, her hand resting on it for just a second longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but acknowledgement. She turned toward the window again, the city fully awake now, movement everywhere, decisions being made in offices she would never see, by people who would never know her name. That had never been the point. The mark on her sleeve remained, faint, almost gone, but not entirely. She looked at it once more, then reached for the drawer again, opening it this time without pause. The fresh blouse was still there, untouched, waiting. She took it out, her fingers smoothing the fabric briefly, then stopped. For a moment, she simply held it, her gaze steady, her breath even. Then she folded it back, placed it inside, and closed the drawer once more. Some things did not need to be replaced to be understood. Some things were meant to remain, not as reminders of what had been done, but of what had been chosen. She stepped back from the desk, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, and walked toward the door, her steps quiet, unhurried, the same as they had been the night before. Behind her, the office remained exactly as it was, orderly, still, complete. Ahead of her, the day moved forward, not waiting, not asking, just continuing. And somewhere within that movement, in the space between what had happened and what would come next, the truth settled without needing to be spoken. It was never about the cake. It was never about the deal. It was about the moment someone showed you who they were, and the choice you made after you believed them.